Good evening, folks, and welcome to this evening's Sober Second Thinkers Talk, sponsored by the Brian Mulroney Institute of Government, where we invite senators to give their reflections on their times in the Senate and talk about the importance of sober second thought in an era of increased partisanship and divisions. My name is Linda Harling-Stalker, and I have the honor of being the director of the Mulroney Institute. This evening, I am pleased to welcome the Honourable Paul Prosper, Canadian Senator. First, though, I'd like to acknowledge we are gathering this evening in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territories of the Mi'kmaq people. This area is to be governed by the peace and friendship treaties signed between the Mi'kmaq and Crown in 1725 and 1779. Recently, I read a manifesto written by the Cherokee author Joseph N. Pierce. In his manifesto of storying, he reminds us that friendship involves relationality. In particular, he asks us to think about speculative relations, which involves creative practice that is grounded in ethical engagement with the land, humans, and other than human beings, and which is also opens possibilities for storying ourselves and our communities into the future. Pierce states that engaging in speculative relations will allow us to better support decolonial practices, where reconciliation means that all are given the opportunities they need to flourish. This means putting reconciliation in motion. This type of work is at the heart of what Senator Paul Prosper does on a daily basis. The Honourable Paul Prosper, a Canadian senator since 2023, is a Mi'kmaq lawyer with more than 25 years of experience in Indigenous legal issues, ranging from project management to First Nations land use and occupation, and governance and community development. A lifelong advocate for the rights of Mi'kmaq people, Senator Prosper is the former chief of the Beknakak Mi'kmaq Nation, and in 2020, he was elected Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief for Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, representing the collective interests of 17 Mi'kmaq First Nations in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, and over 600 First Nations across Canada. Senator Prosper has served on several boards and committees, including the boards of the Atlantic Policy Congress of First Nation Chiefs Secretariat, the Atlantic First Nations Water Authority, the Mi'kmaq Kinawamatwa, I'm sorry, my pronunciation is horrific, as well as the Eastern Door Ilnik Lawyers Group and the AFN Chiefs Committee on Child and Family Services. From 2010 to 23, he taught Mi'kmaq governance and Aboriginal and treaty rights at Cape Breton University, which we'll forgive him for. In 2020, Senator Prosper was inducted as a member of the Bertha Wilson Honor Society at the Dalhousie University Schulich School of Law in recognition for his exceptional service to the legal profession and community. Senator Prosper has connections here at St. FX as well. As a youth, he would come to campus to play basketball in our gym, and he served on our Board of Governors from 2016 to 2019. Senator Prosper's talk this evening, Balancing the Senate, Framing and Fostering an Ill-New Worldview, will focus on his journey to help reconcile Indigenous and non-Indigenous perspectives in the Senate and leveraging his position to advance Mi'kmaq issues and priorities. Please join me in welcoming Senator Prosper to the podium.
Thank you for that introduction, Linda. It's great to see so many people here. I always enjoy coming back to St. FX, and nice to see you, President Hacken. Senator Coyle, great to see you in a different setting. I see Judge Halfpenny McQuarrie, nice to see you. It's nice to see so many people here, and I really am quite honored to be here. I'd like to first recognize my highly capable staff. I want to introduce you to Jennifer Copage, my executive assistant, and Claudine Santos, my director of parliamentary affairs. I also like to recognize my partner, Antoinette Karuna, who is an instructor here as well. And I certainly appreciate all their support and patience. Through this presentation, I would like to take you on a journey that weaves back and forth between two worlds. I will always remember Mi'kmaq elder Lawrence Wells when he spoke one time at the Member 2 Trade Center. With his hands out on center stage, he said one word. He said, energy. For many Mi'kmaq, your relationship to the energy around you is what we call spirit. This Mi'kmaq petroglyph is located at the Bedford Barrens. It's on Mi'kmaq license plates. If you go by Buckingham, you'll see it on the overpass of the Trans-Canada Highway. And really, nobody knows how old it is. Okay, I gotta sort this out here. There are several interpretations of it. One is that it represents a Mi'kmaq star. Another suggests that it's an energetic structure that humans can operate within. And I want to recognize Molly Peters from my community for doing this medallion of the petroglyph. When etched on a rock, it appears to be two-dimensional. However, it was suggested to me to imagine it three-dimensionally. Imagine the outer circle as a sphere or ball of energy. Now picture that ball of energy is you. The top and bottom triangles come together and form a structure much like this, the two triangles coming together here to support the under or inner world, the inner beauty, and the invisible nature of divinity. The left to right triangles come together and form a structure to support the above or outer world, the outer beauty and visible nature of divinity. The X's along the outer edge function much like atoms. They form the sacred foundation of life and represent the way physical energy works, spinning, rotating, multiplying, and dying off. This energetic structure recognizes divinity even at the level of the atom. The spiral in the middle represents how we move and motivate energy, which helps shape the world around us. Throughout my life, I have used this petroglyph or energetic structure to remind me of the importance to maintain a balance between these two realms. It also helps to translate my work in the Senate through a Mi'kmaq lens or worldview. In fact, in many of the Senate interventions, I use stories and Mi'kmaq concepts to create a bridge to share a Mi'kmaq worldview. Don Wedebikson, or Don Wedebiksoltig, where our roots are, or know your roots. I'll share a story with you growing up. As previously mentioned, I grew up in Buckingham. My mother, Ann Prosper, was a single mother and raised at least 14 children. It varied. Needless to say, these were humble beginnings. There were occasions when my mother would come home with Frenchie's clothes, picture huge garbage bags filled with hidden treasures. The idea of my mother handing out clothes to each sibling was a non-starter. It was certain that scraps would ensue between siblings. And so she devised a different method for allocating clothes. This method was the following. She would come home, and the first thing she would say is, "Ase glie," get into the other room. And once we got into the other room, we got on our knees and we formed a big circle. And then she would grab the clothes, dump them in the middle, and your whole objective was to grab as many clothes as you can. Don't get picky. If it's a yellow dress, grab it and hold on to as many clothes as you can get. And then once all the clothes were grabbed and we had our bundles, then the trading began. We started trading with one another, and strangely enough, the person she intended to give the clothes to ended up with that piece of clothing. I want to recognize the many elders who have helped mentor me through the years. To know where your roots are is a key concept in Mi'kmaq consciousness. A Mi'kmaq chief of long ago was asked, "Where does your people come from? Where are your roots?" He replied, "We sprouted from the earth, much like the grass from the ground." My brother Kerry, who many of you know, is a medicine man, and he hates when I say that. He once told me that the prayers he would learn for the unborn, when you combine Don Wedebiksolti with the practice of having prayers for the unborn, an image starts to emerge. As we look upon the ground, we see the eyes and the faces of our unborn rising up from beneath the ground. This is balance and knowing your place. Like you, there are many who have helped guide and support you through your journeys. For me, one such person is former Mi'kmaq Senator Danny Christmas. Growing up, it was important for me to see various Ilnu people stepping forward and taking on a leadership role. Throughout my life work, Danny remained a key mentor for me in my life journey. On April 30th, 2019, I was part of a panel that appeared before the Standing Senate Committee on Indigenous Peoples. Senator Coyle remembers that appearance. Bill C-92, an act respecting First Nations, Inuit, Métis children, youth, and families. As a lawyer, chief, and regional chief, I had many occasions to appear before various House and Senate committees. However, the key difference in this appearance was that this committee was chaired by Senator Christmas. In my wildest dreams, I had never imagined that a Mi'kmaq would play such a key role in the Senate. Up until this point, I always thought that my role and place was in First Nation politics. It was during this appearance that something clicked. A couple of years later, Danny asked me to consider to apply to become a senator. He always inspired me to find a balance between these two worlds. At Ewaptimo, two-eyed seeing. I want to recognize Elders Albert Marshall and his late wife, Mergina Marshall. It's hard for me to do justice to its rich meaning. On June 25th, 2014, I found myself on a panel with Albert Marshall discussing hydraulic fracturing in Nova Scotia. I was the chief of Buckingham at the time. Albert talked about Ewaptimo and how we are the eyes and ears of Mother Earth. Albert said, we don't have the right. Nature has rights. Humans have responsibilities. He said that through Ewaptimo, youth would be given the prerogative to be critical in their thinking and to take whatever the best the institution can offer and also have in mind the best of what our ancestors left with us. He also said, in the minds of our young people, that we would prepare them to walk two roads. Their ancestors' road as Mi'kmaq, and whatever science and technology will bring to us. Leadership is all about giving back. An elder once told me that a leader is someone who steps forward. For me, leadership embraces the concepts like Ewaptimo and Donwellabik Sokdig. They help frame my perspective and ground me. They help ensure that my work in the Senate gives back to the Mi'kmaq and Ilnu people in general. I would like now to provide some examples of how I bring a Mi'kmaq perspective in the Senate. Bill S-13 was titled an act to amend the Interpretation Act and to make related amendments to other acts. It sought to improve the interpretation of law as it relates to existing Aboriginal and treaty rights recognized and affirmed through Section 5 of the Constitution 1982. It does so by adding a non-derogation clause, or NDC, in the Interpretation Act. This NDC provides that all federal enactments are to be interpreted to uphold and not diminish the Section 35 rights of Indigenous peoples. Bill S-13 would render unnecessary NDCs in all federal laws going forward, and it will remove NDCs with limited exceptions in existing federal legislation. On Wednesday, November 8, 2023, which was roughly 51 days after I got sworn in as senator, I brought forward my first amendment in the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee. My amendment proposed that every law in Canada be construed as being consistent with the United Nations Declaration of the Rights on Indigenous People. I soon found out that proposing and defending an amendment in committee, especially the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee, is not for the faint of heart. Needless to say, a majority of vote dismissed my amendment. Having lost, I guess I could have ended it right then and there in committee. But Claudine encouraged me to again speak on my amendment at third reading as part of my maiden speech. A maiden speech is when a senator speaks for the first time in the Senate chamber. I will now read part of my maiden speech. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honourable senators, I rise today. I rise to speak in the chamber for the first time. As this is my maiden speech, I will also share 3 personal stories related to the purpose of this bill, both in existing form and, more importantly, how it can be improved. My first story begins with a quote from a Mi'kmaq elder. I cannot cross the Great Lake to talk to you, for my canoe is too small and I am too old and weak. I cannot look upon you, for my eyes not see far. You cannot hear my voice across the great waters. I therefore send you this wampum in the form of a paper talk to tell the Queen I am in trouble. My people are in trouble. I have seen upwards of 1,000 moons. When I was young, I had plenty. Now I am old, poor, and sickly too. My people are poor. No hunting grounds, no beaver or otter, no nothing. Indians poor, poor forever. No store, no chest, no clothes. All these woods once ours. Our fathers possessed them all. Now we cannot cut a tree to warm our wigwams in winter unless the white man please. We look to you, the Queen. The white wampum tell that we hope in you. Pity our poor Indians in Nova Scotia. These words of Louis Benjamin Pemino, a Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq, in a petition to Queen Victoria in 1841, set out in dramatic fashion the background and defense put forward in this case. Colleagues, these are the first 2 paragraphs of the Marshall logging decision. This was an Aboriginal and treaty rights case that the Mi'kmaq lost in the Nova Scotia Provincial Court. I was co-counsel in that case. I still remember the faces of those present when the judge read his decision on March 8th, 2001. The existence and fate of a people, of a nation, deliberated through a decision consisting of 36 pages and 144 paragraphs. At that time, I felt that the history and future of the Mi'kmaq rested in my hands, and I let them down. I still carry this memory with me, not as a weight, but as an impetus to do more. Our people deserve more. A second example of bringing forward a Mi'kmaq perspective involved my interventions on Bill C-21 in the Senate chamber. Bill C-21, an act to amend certain acts and to make certain consequential amendments, firearms. At third reading of Bill C-21, I spoke in support of an amendment that then Senator Boisvenu put forward. It sought to direct the minister to consult with Indigenous governing bodies and organizations before they submit regulations to each House of Parliament under the Act As this amendment was highly contested in the chamber, I had to make several interventions with other senators. Senator Boisvenou's amendment was eventually voted down and Bill C-21 passed at third reading. Bill S-273. A third intervention I put forward was an amendment to Bill S-273, an act to declare the Chignecto Isthmus Dykeland system and related works to be for the general advantage of Canada. My office worked with the Mi'kmaq in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. My amendment sought to include the critical historical and cultural relationship that the Mi'kmaq and the Acadian people have with the Chignecto Isthmus. At third reading, my amendment was adopted. Bill C-49. This was my last amendment so far in committee. C-49, an act to amend the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Atlantic Accord Implementation Act and the Canada, Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act, and to make consequential amendments to other acts. That is a tongue twister. Given the lack of time afforded to Mi'kmaq witnesses to participate in committee, I helped successfully extend the time needed for them to meaningfully participate. Based on their evidence in committee, I put forward an amendment related to the need for both the federal government and provincial government, but this focus obviously on the federal government, to consult with Indigenous people at key decision points in the Act. My amendment was voted down and C-49 was adopted without amendment. Although I lost, Claudine once again convinced me to speak in the chamber of the importance and need for proper and meaningful consultations to take place with the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia. The following video is my reply to the speech from the throne. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honourable Senators, this item stands adjourned in the name of the Honourable Senator Plett, and I ask for leave of the Senate that, following my intervention, the balance of his time to speak to this item be reserved.
Granted? Agreed. So ordered. Senator Prosper.
As stated by Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Mary Simon in her speech from the throne, reconciliation is not a single act, nor does it have an end date. It is a lifelong journey of healing, respect, and understanding. Colleagues, through my speech, I will expand upon the meaning of reconciliation and its relationship to the duty to consult. I will talk about Bill C-49. My dear friend, Wayne Fulcher, share a dream involving C-49, and end with a postscript tribute. Bill C-49, an act to amend the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Atlantic Accord Implementation Act and the Canada, Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act, and to make consequential amendments to other acts is a complex piece of legislation. I was not able to participate at third reading last week due to previous commitments, but I watched the recorded proceedings. I would like to thank Senators Deakin, Ross, Aucoin, Robinson, Bernard, Tanis, and all my fellow CSG members. Thank you for helping to create a space in this chamber and in committee for my voice to be heard. Also, thank you, Senator Wells and McCallum, for your support. And finally, thank you, Senator Delphine, for calling me a troublemaker. Colleagues, consultation is reconciliation in action. The law provides that when the Crown contemplates an action or decision that has the potential to adversely affect a Section 35 right, they have a duty to consult with the right holders and, where appropriate, accommodate the Aboriginal interest. The Mi'kmaq have existing Aboriginal and treaty rights that have been recognized and affirmed by the highest court in this country, the Supreme Court of Canada. I want to recognize Senator Petten for her efforts and success as Senate sponsor of C-49. In her third reading speech, she provides, quote, "While this legislation will create new economic opportunities, this bill ensures that it is done so in a way that consults Indigenous peoples." And further, the duty to consult on any matter that affects the rights and interests of Indigenous people throughout the life cycle of offshore renewable energy projects is one that is taken seriously. Colleagues, with C-49, the evidence is clear. It is clear that C-49, along with its mirror provincial legislation, can confer a legal interest or duty to a regulator to accommodate and consult Section 35 rights. There has been no consultation undertaken by either the federal or provincial governments in drafting C-49. That evidence of engagement was limited to 2 letters, 1 response, and a meeting with community representatives. That engagement is separate and distinct from the Crown's duty to consult. That in 2010, a formal agreement, terms of reference, outlines how consultations will take place in Nova Scotia. That the terms of reference has been used for hundreds of consultations with the Mi'kmaq and federal and provincial governments. That neither the federal or provincial governments raised C-49 in the many consultations and energy meetings with the Mi'kmaq. That the federal government views consultation taking place at the final authorization stage. That Chief Sidney Peters, co-chair of the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs, was mandated by 12 of the 13 Mi'kmaq bands in Nova Scotia to suggest changes to C-49. That a consultation process with the Mi'kmaq should cover off all the key decision points in the strategic planning process as outlined in C-49. Last Wednesday, I attended a celebration of life for my dear friend Wayne Fulcher. My father died when I was 2, and Wayne was like a father to me. He was in this chamber when I was sworn in as a senator last year and died at age 83. What I loved about Wayne was that he was always eager to learn. He and his wife, Marianne, founded the Fulcher Foundation, a private charity focused on inclusiveness and rural economic growth and sustainability. The Fulcher Foundation is sponsoring a governance project with the Mi'kmaq Grand Council. They are an excellent example of reconciliation in action. Wayne would often state, "Say what you mean and mean what you say." He couldn't stand it when people beat around the bush and did not come out and say what they intended. And then once they said something, he expected people to follow through and do what they say, what they committed to. At the event, a person shared a George Bernard Shaw quote, which seemed to encapsulate Wayne's life. It provides, "This is the true joy in life, being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world would not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it what I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is sort of a splendid torch, which I have got a hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. This represents the spirit of Wayne Fulcher, and I will forever miss him." And now, the final act. You might ask, why did I title this part "The Final Act"? It is because I was obsessed with C-49. Senator Petton, I'm not saying that I'm obsessed with you. Colleagues, Aboriginal and treaty rights are largely based on history, culture, and tradition. I was obsessed with the manner in which the constitutional rights of Mi'kmaq were abandoned in the drafting of C-49. The road through the litigation of Mi'kmaq rights is littered with expedient political decisions and compromises. Government officials, ministers, parliamentarians, please take notice. Take notice that there is a consultation process in Nova Scotia that works. Ask about it, use it. My obsession with C-49 even impacted my dreams. For example, have you ever seen Liam Neeson in Taken? In the movie, there is a scene where he's talking on the phone with the kidnapper who has his daughter. I dreamed that I was Liam Neeson, and the kidnapper was the federal government who was holding hostage our Mi'kmaq rights. Can you imagine? The dialogue goes like this. I don't know which level of government you represent. I don't know what you want. If you're looking to hold ransom our Mi'kmaq rights, I can tell you I don't have money. But what I do have are a very practical set of skills. Skills that I have acquired over a very long career. Skills that make me a nightmare for people like you. If you immediately consult on our rights, that will be the end of it. I will not look for you. I will not pursue you in committee. But if you don't, I will look for you. I will find you, and I will leave much carnage in my wake. I hope to have no more dreams like this. As a postscript, I want to dedicate this speech to my sister Dolly Prosper, or Darlene Prosper. Senator Coyle worked with Dolly while at St. FX. On this day, a year ago, Dolly crossed into the spirit world. She played a major role in the development of my career. Twice, she convinced me to run for chief in my community. On the back of her funeral card is a quote from Marianne Williamson. It reads, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We are all made to shine. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. You playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightening about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others." Walalio, and thank you very much. Thank you. I can't get over that Liam Neeson part. I mean, I ran through this with Claudine and she said, go for it. Again, it was Claudine that convinced me to undertake a listening tour throughout Mi'kma'ki. From February to September of 2024, my staff and I traveled from Newfoundland to the Gaspé in Quebec. From the slide, you can see some details related to the extent of this undertaking. These discussions culminated into a report titled Reconciliation. It's this report right here. It was released on Treaty Day last year. Although I had worked for Mi'kmaq leadership most of my career, and although I served as chief and regional chief for many years, I did not want to presume that I knew what the issues and priorities were. For I found it important to hear from communities and organizations directly about their own needs and priorities. Throughout this tour, several themes emerged. They include governance, health and social issues, economic development, lands and resources, justice, infrastructure, citizenship, language, culture, and history. On October 8th, 2024, I provided this statement in the chamber on the release of Reconciliation. This is a video of my statement. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honourable Senators, just over a year ago, I was sworn into the Senate of Canada. My appointment filled the seat left open following the retirement of the Honourable Danny Christmas, a mentor of mine and the first Mi'kmaq senator ever appointed. In the entire history of the Senate, 26 Indigenous senators have been appointed. 12 of them have been appointed in the past 8 years. Jaime Battist is the first Mi'kmaq member of Parliament, first elected in 2019. This means that Mi'kmaq have only had a direct voice in federal politics for 8 out of the 157 years that Canada has been its own country. So for me, it was important that I hit the ground running. I didn't feel I had the luxury to ease into this position. I have tried to use this position to highlight important issues facing Mi'kmaq, or Ilnu, as we call ourselves, and Indigenous people more broadly. Yet, even though I served as chief and regional chief, I didn't want to presume I knew the issues. That is why I launched a tour around Mi'kma'ki, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq. I traveled from Newfoundland to the Gaspé region of Quebec. I went through New Brunswick, PEI, and of course, Nova Scotia. I listened to and engaged with over 1,700 people. I documented their priorities, their challenges, as well as their successes and their hopes for the next 7 generations. On October 1st, Treaty Day in Nova Scotia, I launched a report resulting from this tour. I called it Reconciliation, and I invite senators to read it in the official language of their choice. I plan to use this report as a guide to ensure that every intervention I make as a senator is tied to the priorities of the Mi'kmaq. Well, Leo, thank you very much. So as mentioned, Reconciliation, our report, is a foundational document that will help guide the work of my Senate office. I try to advance these priorities at every opportunity. For example, we're undertaking meetings now with key party representatives to discuss these themes and priority areas and encourage these leaders to develop them and incorporate them in their policy work and election platforms. I also commented within the chamber on sharing our Mi'kmaq legends and stories, which are recorded in the Hansard. Chamber statements on language revitalization, question period and written questions to help gather important information that communities and organizations have a hard time getting from ministers and their departments. Reconciliation guides my committee work through reviewing legislation and participating in committee studies. Recently, I was informed by Minister Martin of Ill-New Affairs that her department looks to our report within their official briefing packages when they meet Mi'kmaq communities and organizations. Today, Professor McMillan, Jane, mentioned to me that Reconciliation will be used as a textbook, at least in one of her courses. So, you know, these are some of the ways we're utilizing the findings of this report. In Mulroney, the Mi'kmaq concept of sharing data and information. Regardless of who wins the next federal election, many believe that we are entering into a time of fiscal restraint. Government policy is often data-driven, and it has been said that data speaks to the heart of government bureaucrats. Throughout the years, many reports and recommendations have been made regarding First Nations people. Since RCAP, we have tracked numerous First Nation recommendations from key source areas and broke them down into specific categories. We are also undertaking additional research outlining the true cost of crime through all aspects of the criminal justice system. In a time of fiscal restraint, data can help inform government policy and be viewed by government officials as a return on investment. Data can inform government policy related to the enforceability and prosecution of banned bylaws, restorative justice, and crime prevention initiatives that reduce crime and promote community safety. No, this is not a mugshot or an album cover, but this is a post by my dear friend Trevor Bernard. This photo was with an article that Trevor and I got published in 1991 while we were at the University College of Cape Breton. We were contributing authors to a book titled Buktadek, Volume 1, Policy and Consciousness in Mi'kmaq Life. Buktadek. the way light looks when it reflects off the water. As a senator who is appointed, I have the privilege to provide continuity and provide a repository of institutional knowledge. I have the privilege to advance initiatives over the years and help incredible people like Mary Isaac. I have the privilege to animate and shape energy as I walk in balance through two worlds, between two worlds. I have the privilege to reflect my light, my spirit in others and the world around me. While participating at the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee, it was a time when Senator Brett Cotter, who was chair of that committee, it was his last day. And I'm not sure if any of you know about Senator Brett Cotter. For many, including myself, he was highly respected, both as a senator and a chair. So when it was his last day, I wanted to say something to him, and the only thing that came to my mind was Buck-to-Deck. And so I said, I'm going to go for it. It's on the record, the recording. And so I dug it up, and I just wanted to share that with you. So this is me. Briefly, since I have the floor, I would like to make some comments with respect to Senator Cotter. I'm sure it is true for many, but certainly your presence has impacted me quite a bit. I tend to look at certain senators to try to emulate them. I find your abilities as a senator and a chair to be admirable. There is a word in Mi'kmaq which is Buck-to-Deck. It is the way light looks when it reflects off the water. I just want to say that your presence or spirit within this institution has a way of reflecting the light on each of us. And even though you may not be here, that spirit, that light is within us. I want to recognize you for that. And so I ask to you, how does the light look when it reflects off your spirit? To conclude, I'd like to share a story which speaks to Buck-to-Deck. Justin Langan is a Métis youth advocate from Swan River, Manitoba. He participated in the Voices of Youth Indigenous Leaders last year. This Senate initiative recognizes the outstanding achievements of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit youth from ages 18 to 35. These youth appear as official witnesses before the Indigenous Peoples Committee. They share their views and life experiences to help inform the work of the Senate. And as senators, we seek to draw out the evidence in committee through our questions. Senators from all walks of life. There are former mayors, authors, politicians, plumbers, engineers, business owners, farmers, bankers, Olympians, social workers, teachers, government officials, judges, doctors, and so much more. I would like to read a portion of the evidence that Justin submitted at committee. It is his response to a question I asked him. My question, quote, "Thank you so much for everything you provided us. I have a simple question because it was key for me growing up in my approach and path in life. You talked about reconciliation and empowerment. I want to look at empowerment and your later reference to having a connection to culture, identity, and language. Can you tell me how you see a connection there between empowerment and culture, identity, and language?" Mr. Langan. Of course, yes. I see this a lot with Indigenous youth. Some are so broken off from who they are and where they come from because we've seen the residential schools, we've seen the graves, we've seen a lot of the issues, especially with policing as well. Imagine what it does to the mindset of an Indigenous person to see themselves portrayed in the trauma and the damage of the country they are in. Once they understand the beauty of who they are, where they come from, their language and their culture, they see there is no way to represent your culture. I'm wearing this. My mom made it. But there is no one way to be Indigenous. I think that goes back to something much more than just culture. It's the spirit. It's the essence of the deep connection with your ancestors, your community, and where you come from. And using that not just as a negative, but as a positive in a way in which you can actively engage with the world by utilizing your community. That's why I'm so vocal about Swan River. I never used to be, but I am proud to come from this community and what I have learned and what I have struggled with. Walalio, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Prosper. Is that on? We on? Is everyone good? Can you hear? Okay, great. So we have time for questions. So I will walk around with the mic and I'll pass it over. So who's got the first question for us? Must be lots. Over there. All right, here I come.
Hi, thanks, PJ. Thanks for the great speech. Goes right to the heart, for sure. It's not so much a question as a comment. I read some time ago Aldo Chicorp's Governance of the Arctic. I'm sure you know Aldo is from the Schulich School of Law, and it was a great publication about how to proceed with the Arctic governance and include, the Indigenous voice in that future development. And it speaks totally to your efforts to make sure that the Indigenous voice is a participation in how that governance role and model goes forward. Mm-hmm. So I want to commend you on that.
Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing that.
Nice to see you again, Senator Prosper.
Great to see you.
Doug Brown. I was a political scientist here for a number of years, so you'll forgive the political science question. I'm wondering, do you see your role as a truly independent senator, or do you see it, are you in a caucus with other Indigenous senators, or with the, the large type of group that was of all of you who have been appointed by the current government and so forth. So, I mean, how do you get things done politically? Obviously one has to get votes together. And I'm wondering how you see your role in that process.
Thanks for the question. And I see two elements to that question, one about independence and the other one about how do you get things done. When we're first appointed, at least in name, we're appointed as an unaffiliated senator. And which means there's a number of groups in the Senate. I'm with the Canadian Senators Group. Senator Coyle is with the Independent Senators Group. There's a Senators Group with Conservative members there. They're more partisan, like they caucus with their counterparts in the House. And then you have the Progressive Senators Group, which some say has a stronger lean towards the Liberal government. How is there independence in practice? Because if you don't affiliate with a group, then you're an unaffiliated senator and you're somewhat like an orphan. You're not part of a group, and a lot of the duties and functions that senators get, like in committee and sitting on various committees, comes from the group itself. And there's an equation on how big the group is that determines how much participation they'll have in these various committees. And I'm sure Senator Coyle could have some comment on this, but the dynamics with each group is quite different. Within the Canadian Senators Group, I was amazed one time when there's a leader, and the leader of the Canadian Senators Group is Senator Scott Tannis. And so I was observing, I was unaffiliated, I was just scoping it out between the two groups. And then I recall one time, Senator Tannis, he put forward this motion in the chamber, and he voted for his motion, what he wanted. And then I looked at his group and nobody was standing up with him. And then in fact, most of his group stood up against his motion, right? And I thought maybe that's kind of a group for me where they don't follow the whims of their leader. But there's, some incredible groups there, that do incredible work. And of course you have to work together. You need diplomacy to make things happen. And, there's a general deference to the other place, I think, and the role and function that the Senate takes as, a second look at things, to really utilize our expertise to improve the laws that come before us. That takes a lot of political savviness. I mean, Claudine Santos, my Director of Parliamentary Affairs, who has much more experience than I do. She worked before with Senator Dennis Patterson. Talks about political capital, when you're trying to get things done, and the networks and people, so very important. So all I could say to the second part about getting things done is that certain level of diplomacy and reaching across, to different groups and people. Thank you.
Excuse me.
Thank you, Senator Prosper. Very interesting. Can you comment on the current evolution of Indigenous participation in the fisheries on the East Coast? And do you have any vision of where that might end up? We seem to be in a period of flux.
Okay, very good. That is an interesting question. I've followed, just even within Buckingham, there's a certain history related to the fishery. Also from a legal perspective, a key Aboriginal rights case, the Denny, Paul and Sillaboy case, one of the people who were acquitted in that case was Tom Sillaboy from our community. He was fishing with a snare in the river running in our community. And as you know, Jane and Donald Marshall Jr. were just down in Buckingham, down Walneg, and you got charged there, right? For, fishing and selling eels. And so our community got to see the evolution of those cases and how government operates within that paradigm. And it was a rude awakening for me because when you go to law school, you learn about the rule of law. That nobody is above the law. And, if you have a constitutional right, if you have a Supreme Court Canada decision, then, you have that right. And it's up to government officials to implement that right. And the approach that government takes, even still today, is an approach of negotiation without recognition. So it's a simple approach and it's effective. And what it involves is them offering money on a band-by-band basis of the dialogue sort of goes like this. We can't talk about your right. We don't have the mandate to talk about your right. But here's some money for you to get access and things like that. So I think what's been crippling the relationship a bit is the government not being forthright in getting an appropriate mandate, to undertake discussions, that have been recognized and affirmed by the Supreme Court of Canada. Technically, all laws must trace their roots back to the Constitution. So I just say that a bit in the sense that you need that component in order to drive change. There's always going to be issues, as we know, within the fishery, but a key part of effective governance is recognizing the right. Because if you recognize the right, then it equips the Mi'kmaq with the appropriate tools to manage and to stop, things from happening that is causing, problems. But you also need, people to respect that right as well. I understand it can be quite competitive. We're talking about a livelihood for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So there's a need. I think Jane and what she's doing is a very courageous and much needed dialogue between bringing the two groups together. I think that says a lot, but government has to ante up with an appropriate mandate to equip the Mi'kmaq with the right to effectively regulate it. That's so important, I believe. I hope I answered your question.
Hello, Senator PJ. It's just you do our chamber great honor, and thank you for your wonderful, wonderful speech tonight, and for all the gifts you bring to the Senate of Canada. I have two questions. You and I have spoken about your reconciliation report, and I really commend you and the whole team on that incredible effort that you undertook. And now you have it. We've talked about you bringing it to our Indigenous Peoples Committee, assuming both of us are back on that committee, because nobody's on any committee right now that we're prorogued. But we've talked about you bringing it to that committee for consideration of your peers at the Indigenous Peoples Committee, which I look forward to. But one of my first question is, how do you ever prioritize and benchmark what you want to accomplish, on behalf of the 1,700, individuals that participated so well in those conversations in the communities? How are you going to take it and move all of us, with you into implementation of the various recommendations that have come out? So that's number one. Number two, the very important theme that you raised here tonight is one that you and I both, and many of us on the Indigenous Peoples Committee, are very frustrated with, and that is this concept of consultation, which is never adequate. And you have every right to, and I applaud you for continuing to raise it. The issue of consultation, if you could go a little further on what you think needs to be done to once and for all move forward in the way that, in this case, the federal government should be moving forward to improve its record on consultation and therefore its record on getting legislation right.
Thank you. As always, excellent questions. I just want to mention when a senator gets sworn in, they have a sponsor, and Senator Coyle was my sponsor, and I want to thank you for that. So how do we, how will my office benchmark or prioritize, those needs and expectations of the roughly 1,700 people we had discussions with? And your second question about consultation and what really needs to be done by the federal government to improve that record. I must admit it is a challenge to, when you look at, a report that, did I hit something that turned something off? I think my foot hit it. All right, thank you very much. I mean, like, there, and I really commend Claudine and Jen for their work. But what we found out, and the way it's laid out within these themes, Claudine had a way of having a tick for every time a certain theme was mentioned. So, governance was mentioned the most. So that went to the top. And there were some issues that were quite universal throughout our discussions, like governance, for example, ban bylaws. So, and there's always the low-hanging fruit, or you hope there is low-hanging fruit on certain things that you can work on or utilize just by being a parliamentarian, whether it's, sometimes people just want answers. They want a phone call, they want an email, like it's, they're trying to get things done and plan, and there's ways of generating that answer or getting that person to follow up, whether it's through a direct meeting or, questions, written or oral questions within the chamber, things of that nature. But the way we're going to sort of look at it is we're going to develop a work plan that has short, medium, and long-term objectives. And the great thing about being a senator is you're appointed. When I was chief, my term was 2 years. After those 2 years, you're into another election. And I remember people saying, like, you're doing that just because it's an election year. And when I was chief in Buckingham, I would say, don't you know every other year is an election year? I mean, but there's theoretically I can be there till I'm 75. So, unlike, members of parliament, subject to the vote and, whims or, of their electorate, there's a bit of time to work on things. And certainly some things will take quite a bit of time. But some things might not take a long time. And so with respect to this report, I just want to add that, we're finding out that, people find it to be a useful document. So what we're going to do is we're going to update this report. It won't be as extensive as traveling, long, many hours. But we're going to make sure it's current. And another thing we're going to do is we're going to come out with a report every year, which sort of comments on the things that we were able to accomplish. We won't be able to accomplish everything, but, it's just a way of being a little more transparent about, trying to answer the views and expectations that people have about, their needs and expectations. So we're hoping that we're running a contest right now, with youth of certain ages for a Christmas card, and then of older ages for the cover of our annual report. So we're looking forward to that. Getting back to consultation, and you're right. I mean, I know that I was a bit hard on consultation throughout this presentation because I've been there as a chief, as a regional chief, as a legal advisor on the importance of consultation and how it can actually be a mechanism, towards reconciliation if followed. So like on C-49, there's a consultation process in Nova Scotia. It's existed for a long time. Hundreds of consultations went through that consultation terms of reference. And so my obvious question to, the minister and others was, why didn't you follow it? Why were there no consultations? And, it was a bit humorous, but, I wanted to have that dream, to remind people, the Liam Neeson dream, of consult, because I will find you, do what you need to do. Do what you're legally obligated to do, which is to consult on rights, initiatives that impact rights. So I would say, a core element to that is to follow the process. And it's not a matter of doing it hours before a decision is made or hours after a decision is made. It's, early on into process and to develop those relationships and to build that trust. It's so important to build that trust because, as I mentioned before, the road through the litigation of Mi'kmaq, Aboriginal, and treaty rights is littered with political expediency and compromise. And we get to see that, at times through our work. Just extending that timeline on C-49 was a nightmare, so much pressure to get things through. And you're just saying, wait, just give the Mi'kmaq, afford them a decent amount of time to, provide, a meaningful brief and put evidence forward. So, I wish, there would be some kind of mechanism to keep, government officials in check besides litigation, right? Why do we have to litigate all the time? Aboriginal people can't afford litigation. Yes, we have in the past, we've been successful, but what are we going to do? Are we going to relitigate a constitutional right we already have? Are we going to relitigate Marshall? It's there. So, I think there has to be a mechanism or a way to hold government true to their constitutional duties. aside from litigation. And of course, you know, it takes committed parliamentarians to be informed on these issues and to call to question government officials when they don't follow that. So I hope, you know, I just want to say I'm so glad that you're at the Senate, because it really has helped me. And I know we go for walks. We live pretty well right beside each other. And Senator Coyle and myself and others, we at times do this walk from the chamber back to where we live. And it's nice to share stories and laugh. I truly appreciate that.
Well, Alan, PJ. So I want to pick up on the point you were just talking about, but maybe shift to provincial politics.
Sure.
Not long ago, our premier wrote a post about how special interest groups were preventing him from basically extracting all the resources he possibly could. My good friend, Chief Andrea, rightly called him out on that and said, you know, by special interest groups, are you talking about Indigenous right holders? And it kind of backpedaled a little, but we now see the government putting in place policies basically to avoid any kind of accountability. And so I'm wondering, you know, I having been a Naleg white girl in Mi'kmaq communities for the last 35 years, I've seen the impact of ongoing litigation, as you say. Like it's exhausting to communities. So I'm wondering if you could give some advice to us, like how do we stand up against this? How do we speak out? How do we ensure consultation is real and legitimate? How do we avoid that kind of populist kind of king making? I want to call him Trump light, you know, like I'm concerned really about how it's going to impact communities. I'm wondering if you have any advice.
Wow.
You know, just a little question.
I must admit that's a tough one. I mean, especially if you have a particular slant, you know, that government has, and they're looking for, they're picking the right things to try to make it seem right on behalf of their positions and policy directives. You know, because you're right, litigation, I mean, is expensive. And chances are you're not going to get the answers you really want. You know, it's dependent upon a judge. You know, it could be narrow, you know, not as general as you're looking in terms of the decision itself. It could take on that form. So it's just, it may seem overwhelming, but you know, what I'm starting to learn is how important it is to have networks and connections and relationships and to build upon those, to have people to hopefully afford you an opportunity for comment, to undertake initiatives such as this, to inform people, you know, to help them maybe become more engaged if they see things, if they hear things, if they're able to, you know, provide comment to something that may not seem right. But it is a tough thing. But the thing that I think is key is on the Mi'kmaq side of the equation as well, is you need that unity. You need that united front, you know, because an excellent example, you know, we've seen it in Marshall, is if you don't have that, they'll just pick you off one by one, you know, and you really wouldn't get, you know, as far individually to where you can go collectively. So it's building that, you know, building on those institutions and those relationships internally, that stands a better chance in terms of, when the gloves come off, that the communities and the Mi'kmaq people are united. And once that starts hitting at the grassroots level, government starts hearing it, especially if you get into direct action, as well. And there's a time, for litigation. There's a time for negotiation, but there's also a time for direct action. We wouldn't be having these cases if there wasn't for direct action. If there was, if there wasn't Donald Marshall and, Jane Fish in there would be no Marshall case. If it wasn't for Jimmy Simon, gunning, driving off the reserve land, hunting, there would be no Simon case. So it's a mixture of all those three, but I think at the core is the Mi'kmaq people being unified, and people at the grassroots level being unified as well, where we hopefully act as one, one voice, one heart, one spirit. Great question. I hope I might have answered part of it.
Okay, we have time for another question here at the back.
Honourable PJs. I have a question relative to the treaty right for moderate livelihood. In terms of, the Supreme Court has already been very clear that that means necessities, but it doesn't mean an accumulation of, unwarranted wealth. My question relates to, in your work and your long and short-term goals, can we see a time when the federal government will sit down and come up with a better definition to try to eliminate some of the conflict that shouldn't be there if they did their job? So I guess I just want to know, do you see that we're ever going to get a better definition, quantification, something that will allow people to be at rest and allow the treaty right to stand without so much conflict?
I first want to say you're an incredible singer. I was at a funeral earlier this week, and but getting back to your question, I think that's a key point. Because I think it is the elephant in the room a bit, about, well, what is moderate livelihood? What are necessaries? We know it's not, as you said, an outright accumulation of wealth. And, but I think it's a mixture, because if you're talking moderate livelihood, you're talking about the Supreme Court decision, which means you're recognizing a court decision. Start with that, start with recognizing the nature of the right. Because as, with Mi'kmaq people, once you do that, then there are mechanisms and things that start clicking. It's almost like there's a chapter there that never gets looked at until you recognize a right. And the moment you recognize a right, that chapter just opens up. And part of that chapter involves Mi'kmaq knowledge, like Netakulunk, or what they say, Nadugalump, where, Albert says it, we don't have the right. Nature has rights, we have responsibilities. And, that's a huge part of Netagalunk, because there were always these checks and balances to ensure that the ecological integrity of the land and resources was there for future generations. So I think in part that once you recognize truthfully the nature of the right, then it could equip the Mi'kmaq with applying these principles, to ensure that, that the interests of the Mi'kmaq and non-Mi'kmaq are taken into account. I've heard elders tell me on numerous occasions that, people are always focusing on the right. It's my right, in terms of treaty or Aboriginal rights. But what he kept reminding me is it's the responsibility that underpins that right. I would listen to my brother Kerry talk about, the nature of treaties. They were really there not for humans, but for the animals. And it was our role, to take, to be there, because obviously the fish, the animals, they cannot defend themselves. They can't speak for themselves. And that's part of the relationship that Mi'kmaq people have with the natural environment. So, there's a lot that can be put to bear, as it relates to management of lands and resources that exists within Mi'kmaq culture and tradition. It's embedded within there. But the thing that triggers it, I believe, is actually recognizing the right. It puts a proper foundation for Mi'kmaq people to effectively govern, and take control. And, it's rather than at a negotiating table, which still exists today. Like, what is Sparrow, 1991? I was involved in the Martin and Gugu case, Doug Brown and I. And same story, we have Denny Paul and Syliboy, Nova Scotia Court of Appeal. Sparrow relied on Denny Paul and Syliboy. And what we found out in that case, classic example, they meet with the chief and council. They say, we don't have a mandate to talk about your right. But what we do have is money and disagreement. So let's talk about access. Let's talk about equipment, and it's negotiation without recognition, and that has to stop. Thanks so much for your questions. I hope I addressed it.
All right. Any last questions? My goodness, these steps are deeper than I thought as I walk down here. Great. Well, thank you. Join me in thanking Senator Prosper for his time today. Just a small token of our appreciation from the Mulroney Institute. Thank you for your time.
Oh, wow. I appreciate it.
So this time next week, same bat time, same bat channel. Different room. Same room. We're fortunate to have Senator Mary Coyle come and bring stories from the Red Chamber for us next week. Please come and join us for that. And then Senator O'Quinn will be wrapping up our series for this year on the 19th of March. So please mark those days in your calendar. Those are coming up. Any students in the room tomorrow at 11:30, we're holding an information session on the contest we're hosting, which is manifesting a country. So manifestos for the future of Canada. So please come out. We have pizza, nothing like pizza to draw the students out. So it's in the Hudson Boardroom, which is on the 4th floor in the far corner. Otherwise, folks, please drive home safely and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you so much.
That was wonderful.
Oh, my pleasure.
I hope you have no more Liam Neeson dreams.